Good evening, welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Paul Karitsis. This is the second part of my article on classical Hades, a chapter in the history of hell. Only a select few individuals ever managed a lateral glance at the morbid sights of the underworld whilst they were still alive. Three that spring to mind are the celebrated heroes Odysseus, Orpheus, and Iraklis. In the Ithacan soldier king's case, the witch Circe had advised him that the best way to reach Ithaca was to consult with the soul of the wise seer Tiresias in Hades. Tiresias might, according to Circe, be capable of unravelling the arcanum, given that his previous incarnations were not exclusive to one of the two genders. To get there safely, Odysseus has to follow the course of the river Oceanus until he arrives at the forked crossroads where the Cocytes and the Phlegethon pour themselves into the Acheron. Standing at the mouth of a subterranean cave which leads to Hades, Odysseus enacts a ritual that includes pouring a libation to the dead and sacrificing two black animals, a ewe and a ram. Blood flows into the subterranean conduit, attracting all sorts of ghosts and paranormal denizens, though Odysseus aptly draws his sword and prevents them from lapping up the blood until Tiresias can fumble his way to the mouth of the cave and consume some of the vital life force that empowers the silent dead with speech. At this point, Odysseus is stunned to see the simulacrum of his shipmate Elpenor emanating from the bloody pit. Their ship had sailed from the Isle of Aeaea in such a hurry that nobody was yet conscious of the fact that the unfortunate sailor had suffered a fatal tumble from the roof of Circe's residence. Satisfied that his friend will now execute the customary burial rites that will enable him to reach Hades proper safely, Elpenor spontaneously vanishes from sight. A short while afterwards, Tiresias makes his anticipated appearance and, after tasting the oxygen-rich blood that will enable him to speak, gives voice to a premonitory soliloquy that pinpoints exactly which god is angry, which is Poseidon, what has angered him, the blinding of Polyphemus, who's his son, and what can be done to appease him. He wants the cattle of the sun to be safeguarded. Tiresias' imminent departure from the pits allows another more familiar, disembodied spirit to come to light, Odysseus' mother. She comes as the bearer of both good and bad news, announcing that his wife, Penelope, had remained fiercely faithful to him, but that his father is suffering severe despondency owing to the disappearance of his own child. The ghosts continue their coming and going to the pit, mimicking a disparate chain of pictorial images that come forth into our minds during sleep entirely of their own volition. Next in line is his former commander, Agamemnon, who tells Odysseus of the treacherous conspiracy that his scheming wife Clytemnestra successfully executed to his own detriment after he returned home. Other vanquished heroes of the Trojan War also emerge: the mighty warrior Achilles, son of Peleus and the nymph Thetis, Patroclus, Achilles' comrade and beloved brother-in-arms, and Ajax, son of Telamon and Bedivere. Achilles' own gloominess appears to abate when Odysseus tells him of the marvellous feats enacted in the living sphere by his son, Neoptolemus, though Ajax is much less receptive to his advances, still somewhat furious at the post-Trojan tribunal for having awarded Achilles' armour to Odysseus instead of himself. Odysseus finds that the ethereal images appearing, pinching out, and then vanishing swiftly are dictated by his own willingness to see them. He sees Tantalus strung beneath one of the branches of his tree, Sisyphus heaving his rock along a steep hill, Titius's liver being picked apart by a flock of aggressive vultures, the judge Minos issuing a decree with a golden sceptre in his hand, the shadow of Achilles, the muscle-bound hero Heracles, and the cheerful Orion. Growing uneasy of the large number of ghosts now crowding around the blood for a chance to speak, Odysseus flees from the ghastly sight and rejoins his seafaring companions. Together they sail back to Aeaea, the Isle of Circe, rowing as quickly as possible. Orpheus, the legendary musician from Thrace, also visited the underworld. He sought to salvage the life of Eurydice, his newly wedded wife, by descending to the Stygian darkness and charming the ruling inhabitants with heartfelt songs played on his lyre. Enamoured of the music, Pluton and Persephone agreed to give Eurydice a second chance at life, on the condition that he lead the way to the living realm without pivoting to see if she was following, until they were both safely out of the deathly shade of the infernal regions. Orpheus, of course, wasn't able to keep his side of the bargain, and so Eurydice was sucked back through the steep funnel leading to the fields of Asphodel, this time for good. It is most fitting that the strongest man to ever grace the mythological terrain of ancient Greece managed to sneak a peek of the dreaded Hadean landscape, though not of his own volition. The 12th and most perilous labour assigned to Heracles involved capturing Cerberus, which was the Hound of Hell, and bringing him to King Eurystheus of Tiryns. Heracles wasn't one to shy away from any task, no matter how daunting or insuperable it appeared, and he promptly set about his descent to the underworld through the familiar cave of the Teneros. Crossing the Styx didn't pose too much of a problem either. Heracles merely struck a frightful pose and frowned, striking terror in Charon, who ferried him across without any objections. There he found his old friends, Theseus and Pirithous, mindlessly glued onto the chair of forgetfulness for their hubris in thinking they could abduct and carry off Persephone, queen of the underworld. Heracles manages to liberate the bulk of Theseus after a whole lot of tugging and pulling, but heaving Pirithous up proves to be a much thornier affair. He eventually comes to terms with the latter's futile situation and sees no choice but to move on to the task of capturing Cerberus. Scrambling all the way up to the Hadean palace, he finds Pluton and Persephone and pleads for their permission to capture the Hound of Hell. At first the couple seem rather reluctant, but they eventually yield to the request when Heracles agrees to tackle the beast barehanded. Confronting and seizing the dreadful monster turns out to be child's play for the Man of Steel. He grapples the beast by two of its throats, rolls him into the magical skin of the Nemean lion, slings him over his back, and then charges off to find Eurystheus at Tiryns. The king was so mortified at the sight of Cerberus that he dived into a pithos, which is a large storage jar, refusing to come out until the threat had been removed from his quarters. Bold and fearless as he was, Heracles paid the underworld a second visit to rescue a Greek princess by the name of Alcestis. This lady was famed for the fidelity and love she espoused towards the suitor that was picked to become her husband, King Admetus. On the night of their wedding, Admetus was remiss in conducting the requisite sacrifice to honour the goddess Artemis. The goddess's fury was eventually appeased. However, this was followed by another predicament in which the three fates appeared and condemned him to death, a condition that could only be evaded if someone else stepped forth as a willing substitute. Without as much as a thought for the worth of her own life, Alcestis consumed poison and died in his place. Heracles came to the rescue as soon as he heard of Admetus's horrifying misfortunes. Greatly impressed by the kindness and hospitality expressed towards him when he was an apologetic visitor to Admetus's residence, Heracles agreed to advocate on the king's behalf. He descended to Hades and pleaded for the safe return of a cherished soul to the plane of the living. Upon hearing his story, Persephone agreed with Heracles that a grand injustice had befallen Alcestis and decided to grant her freedom. The royal couple enjoyed a stretch of long serendipity from that point onwards, siring a son and a daughter, Eumelus and Perimele, respectively. In retrospect, one would not be incorrect in stating that a truly Hellenistic conception of the underworld, the stylistically branded hell of later times, did not acknowledge any disembodied forces of pure good or pure evil. As progressive, poetic, and logical as it might have been, though, this cosmological outlook did not remain stagnant for very long. By the 5th century BC, many daimones, which in Greek means demons, born below the aegis of the classical prototype could easily be mistaken for notions of Beelzebub fabricated by the Jews, or the viperish and scaly minions lurking in the Christian purgatory in Dante's 14th century epic poem Inferno and in John Milton's Paradise Lost. The clearest evidence for this is in a 5th century fresco painted by Polygnotus of Odysseus's harrowing sojourn in Hades that adorned a building at the Delphic shrine sacred to Apollo. Sadly, the mural has not survived the ravages of time, but we know of it through Pausanias's painstaking description of Polygnotus's work. The keen traveller tells us that Polygnotus initiated something of a playful and imaginative departure from the literary orthodoxy of classical Hades in adding personages to his pictorial transcriptions that Odysseus had not seen and which Homer had forgotten to describe. One that stands out because of its petrifying morphology is Evrinomos, which was a beast demon with a bluish-black complexion and razor-sharp fangs that sat on the black banks of the feared Styx and consumed the rotting flesh of the vilest evildoers. In depicting this demon, Polygnotus was descrying a dream of the future in which the subterranean strata of Hades and its familiar imagery would sear in the cooking pot of the Christian imagination and become an after-death fantastical dungeon of brutality, savagery, and rigid torment. Indeed, the human propensity to yield to temptations of darkness, to dwell there, to investigate its ever-fluctuating landscapes and inhabitants, and to imagine there, has become something of a self-fulfilling prophecy and, sinful. I hope you've enjoyed the article. I will see you next time for something else. Take care.